So my talk is titled Reception of the Exhibition of 14 Estonian Architects in Riga, Reverberations in the Fields of Architecture and Design. On July 4, 1978, exhibition of 14 Estonian architects was opened at the House of Architects Union in Riga. Shortly after, it was shown in the foyer of the Academy of Science Library in Tallinn in May-June the same year. The exhibition presented conceptual and analytical architectural proposals that sketched out utopian ideas on architecture and with humor and irony manifested critique of the Soviet architectural practice, uniformity and standardization of mass housing developments. Unfortunately, so far, neither interviews nor archival research has helped me to locate any hints about how this exhibition was brought to Latvia, but this time span is very short. In June it was in Tallinn, in July it was already in Riga, so apparently it was some informal contact. The exhibition was positively received in local press and created reverberations, both in the fields of design and in particular in architecture, that in some cases continued the dialogue and exchange between artists, designers, and architects in Riga and Tallinn, or led to new initiatives in Latvia, namely to the establishment of annual thematic exhibitions of experimental projects of young architects. In reviews that appeared in press in Riga, the exhibition of Estonian architects was praised for bringing in critical and analytical view to developments of mass housing architecture and for showing imaginative utopian projects. As it was highlighted by several authors, projects reflections, projects conceptions, projects utopias, or as it was pointed out in descriptions of the exhibition, exhibition critique, exhibition irony, exhibition problem, exhibition suggestion, exhibition question, and exhibition journalism. Critics in Latvia acknowledged the expression of individual attitudes of the authors, noting that the exhibition presented an image of architect-artist as opposed to architect-technician subordinate to the dictate of building industry. Reviews emphasized the importance of the position of architect-artist who demonstrates ability to prognosticate development and steers ideals that can be later measured against the reality and applied in architectural practice. One of the most elaborate reviews of the exhibition in Latvia, titled 14 Meditations between New York and Tangarags was a newly built blockhouse suburb a little bit aside from the center of Riga, written by designer and art critic Jānis Borgs, started with an extensive critique of uniform urban developments of Soviet architecture. Borgs drew attention to the sense of alienation of urban residents and anonymity of prefabricated blockhouse districts. He described newly built urban dwellings as huge systems of computational machines, where in the evenings people are attached to the same cables and same TV sets, watching same programs and thinking the same thoughts. Borgs then proceeded to the critique of the standardization of built environment, writing about the syndrome of non-belonging evoked by the uniform urban architectural solutions and about the devaluation of the profession of architect to the niveau of an office worker, which is constraining architects' artistic potential. Exhibition of Tallinn architects was seen as offering an alternative, providing different vision and method of architecture, combining rational concepts with humor, sarcasm, critique, and new ideas developed among a small circle of collaborators. Like other authors, Borgs particularly acknowledged contributions by Leonhard Lapin, his concept of an invisible architecture and Lapin's architectural boards, The City of the Living, The City of the Dead, and Tallinn, Estonia, New York, which has proper titles actually, The New Skyline of Tallinn. Borgs was also mentioning works by Tõnis Vint, Vilen Kunepi, Jüri Okas, and other authors. These opinions on exhibitions and this development problems in relation to development of mass housing in Soviet Union were also voiced in other reviews by Valdis Salms, who was the designer, and art critic Jāzep Stvaigs. The exhibition of Estonian architects also influenced arguments presented in the article titled Architect Enters Environment, published in the journal Art by the architect, architecture historian, and active member of Latvian Architects Union, Jānis Leinieks. This review addressed the topical theme of organization of living environment, approaching environment as an extended notion involving material elements, spatial relations, and human actions. The article invited to re-establish aesthetic relations to the environment, in particular in the areas of application of standardized building elements. As one of the means of investigating problems of the environment, Lēnieks identified the necessity to develop unrealizable avant-garde projects, concepts and projects ideas, like those presented in the exhibition of Estonian architects. This would provide the basis for the emergence of approaches introducing individual visions, not restricted by limitations of building industry. As stated by Lēnieks, and I quote, apparently avant-garde architecture should take the role of an impulse, effectively shedding light on the general directions of the development. End of quote. This short overview of the reception of the exhibition of Estonian architects allows to identify main protagonists of my further presentation and to map out contemporary discussions and topics to which the exhibition contributed or was related to in Latvia, such as socially responsible role of the architect or designer and new approaches in organization of living environment. It also can serve as a starting point for describing exchange between Tallinn and Riga artists and architects. On the one hand, the exhibition was reviewed and acknowledged by the designers, also authors of a number of articles on design and art, Jānis Borgs and Valdis Calms, who themselves were members of a missionist group, and we heard about the missionist group already yesterday, and I will return to them a little bit later in my presentation, and were active in the development of innovative kinetic design proposals for public spaces in Riga, inspired by legacy of Latvian member of constructivist avant-garde Gustav Klucis. Both Borgs and Calms were well familiar with works of Tallinn artists and architects, with whom they sustained friendship already since the end of the 1960s or early 1970s in the case of Calms, and with whom they shared interests in legacy of Russian constructivism and interwar functionalism. In fact, all the detailed reviews of the exhibition of 14 Estonian architects in Riga were written by the artists and critics associated with the missionist groups, Jāzeps Tvaiks, Jānis Borgs, and Valdis Calms. On the other hand, the exhibition of Estonian architects was received as an impulse to approach mounting problems of the Soviet urban planning and mass housing architecture by the younger generation of Latvian architects like Lēnieks, who were looking for the means to raise polemics on such topical issues as quality of newly built urban dwellings, organization of living environment, and preservation of cultural heritage. In the summer 1978, the exhibition of 14 Estonian architects and the themes raised by it overlapped with discussions that accompanied a major large-scale exhibition of monumental and decorative art to our city that on the 23rd of May opened in Riga at the exhibition hall of St. Peter's Church. To our city, initiated by the Executive Committee of Riga City and the Chief Artist of Riga, Georgs Barkāns, featured 80 projects by 115 painters, sculptors, designers, and architects who were invited to contribute ideas for improvement of the environment and visual design of public spaces of Riga. The exhibition highlighted some problems, such as missing collaboration between architects, artists, and designers in the process of planning of new living areas. The issue that a couple of years later was characterized by Lēnieks as follows, and I quote, "In the presence of festive relationships and friendly acclaims at the occasions of exhibition openings, there is no normal work relationship. Works of designers and interior designers in ordinary public buildings have discredited artists' collaborations with architects. Possibly one of the reasons for it is the remoteness of the two distinct high schools or even existence of contrary schools." End of quote. Here, Lēnieks was referring to separate education programs for architects run by the Riga Polytechnical Institute and education in design and applied arts taking place at the State Academy of Art. This situation contrasted with the conditions in Tallinn, where artists, designers, and architects received education at the same institutions, the State Art Institute. Jānis Borgs remembers that the exhibition of Estonian architects, also designers and artists, left particularly strong impression because they presented their work as a united front. Consequence of exhibition of Estonian architects in comparison to our city was also noted in the press reviews. Next is reviews of two our cities that highlighted diverse individual solutions presented in the exhibition, from design of children playgrounds, firewall designs, to interior designs for schools and placements of sculpture in the public areas, some articles by the authors involved in kinetic and experimental design emphasize necessity to analyze city as a dynamic system with a complex approach involving findings of cybernetics and other system sciences. Valdis Calms, in an extensive article advocating environmental art as a spatial aesthetic structure, organizing surrounding environment, highlighted two tendencies present in the exhibition: decoration, involving use of cheap materials for a temporary effect, and solutions envisioning creation of unified aesthetic environment. In Calms' view, visual image of the city did originate in interconnections between numerous utilitarian and aesthetic elements. Therefore, environmental art should aesthetically embrace various dimensions of urban space: small architectural forms, advertising, and design. Calms advocated for universal theoretical framework that would address synthesis of different art forms in urban space, integrating research in science and sociology, and with creative artistic approach in all these collaborations, charged with a leading role and having the leading position in such interdisciplinary collaboration. Several arguments expressed by Calms in his article echoed ideas presented in the review of To Our City, written by Estonian architect Leonhard Lapin. In his text, Organization or Decoration, which is echoing also the themes of the Valdis Calms text on To Our City, in his text, Organization or Decoration, published in special edition Word to Use of the weekly newspaper Literature and Art, Lapin argued that the contemporary city should be viewed as a symbol of machine age that requires unified view on architecture, street design, and information as a system that impacts psyche of a city inhabitant. Street should be organized as an audiovisual multimedia, establishing communication and synthesis between design, street, advertising, and art elements. Lapin paid particular attention to proposals that involved collaboration of artists and architects, noting that the joint projects by progressive artists and architects in the field of environmental design create basis for the new tendency of contemporary visual art, namely fantastic design. In this respect, Lapin particularly acknowledged the central piece of the exhibition, the model of a reconstruction and development plan for the Lenin Street, created by the group of architects Ausmas Kuiņa, Tamāra Šulgina, Jānis Lēnieks, and Jānis Rutkis, that made synthesis of art and architecture and development of green areas at the central focus of the future regeneration plan of the central street. So this is what you see at the screen at the moment. The plan for the regeneration of the Lenin Street. In his analysis of individual proposals of the exhibition, Lapin particularly addressed works of his peers in Riga. For example, a part of the Lenin Street development project, Jānis Borg's electrokinetic sculpture Dynamic City, that referenced concepts and drawings of Latvian origin Russian constructivist Gustav Klucis. Lapin positively evaluated the proposal by architect Anda Ārgale and graphic artist Māris Ārgalis for individual recreation zone and communication zone in the Old Town Riga. And Lapin particularly acknowledged as significant through its reference to Russian constructivism and development of kinetic structure in relation to environment, the proposal for the kinetic sculpture The Lighthouse by Valdis Calms, Anda Ārgale, and Māris Ārgalis, which was developed for the left bank of Daugava River. All these proposals were prepared as a result of collaboration between artists, designers, and architects. Lapin's article is another evidence of close links between Riga and Tallinn artists and designers. His review was published in the same issue of the weekly newspaper Literature and Art that featured commissioned photomontage series Bizarre Riga by the Emissionist Group, that involved as its members Māris Ārgalis, Jānis Borgs, Valdis Calms, Kirill Šmeļkovs, and Kārlis Kalsars. Inspired by works of Dada and Surrealism, the artists use means of photography and photomontage to present a different, estranged image of everyday of Riga city, the conflation of architectural and everyday life of the city inhabitants. As it was mentioned before, Lapin was well acquainted with the work of the group, and he was even featured in one of the photo collages they produced, and this photo collage was shown yesterday in the presentation of Ieva Astachovska. The exchange of exhibition reviews between Salms, Borgs and Lapin regarding the exhibition of 14 Estonian architects and the exhibition To Our City can be viewed as a manifestation of a mutually supporting network of artists sharing aesthetic interests and working towards strengthening and popularizing each other's work. This exchange found continuation in 1979 exhibition of graphic works of four Tallinn artists Leonard Lapin, Raul Meil, Tõnis Vind and Jüri Okas, curated by Jānis Borgs at the House of Science in Riga, as well as other encounters, for example, visit of Borg, Salms and Baltinvietis in Pärnu in 1979, which resulted in an interview published also in magazine Literature and Art. Alongside exchanges with the artists of the emissionist group, the exhibition of 14 Estonian architects also influenced processes in the field of architecture in Latvia. The innovative approach towards thinking about architecture through graphic proposals and the critical polemic intention of the show provided an impulse for establishing yearly thematic exhibitions of experimental projects of young architects at the Architects' Union of Latvian Soviet Socialist Republic. As remembered by Jānis Lēnieks, the initiative came from the chair of the Latvian Architects' Union, Valdemārs Šusts, who, referring to the show of Estonian architects, invited members of the section of young architects of the union to consider this example. The opportunity was seized by the younger members of the union, Lēnieks and Juris Paegli, who in 1979 organized the first exhibition of experimental projects of young architects titled What Will Be the Fate of Regional Architecture? The exhibition had a polemic and agitational character, bringing attention to neglected and desolate state of historic buildings and landscapes, displaying proposals for the regeneration, reconstruction, and reusage of traditional vernacular architectural forms. The exhibition manifested critique of the standardized development of rural areas and towns in Latvia, where the application of unified, typified architectural forms and construction methods threatened to erase local specificity, historic landmarks, and traditional landscapes. In this respect, the show introduced themes that emerged with the advent of postmodernism. Instead of focusing on buildings classified as historic monuments, what will be the fate of regional architecture, paid attention to a wide range of common examples of historic heritage. As characterized by Lēnieks, the show was an offer without a demand, as most of the proposals for repurposing and renovation of historic buildings and sites were not backed by concrete building plans. What will be the fate of regional architecture gathered proposals by 36 architects. The exhibition was shown in 12 cities and towns across Latvia, receiving wide popular response. Exhibition of the experimental projects of young architects turned into a tradition, with one thematic exhibition held each year. These shows developed into a platform where innovative, polemic, unorthodox, and conceptual ideas of architects could be shown. For example, members of the Artists and Architects Collective Workshop for the Restoration of Unfelt Feelings had several times presented their inventive and conceptual projects at the exhibitions of young architects between 1980 and 1985. Looking back at the exhibitions mentioned in my talk and the related articles published in Latvia, one can conclude that these exhibitions functioned as a media, as communicative tools that manifested urgent critical issues of their time, critique of the developments of Soviet architecture, and the necessity to introduce new creative approaches in thinking about space, landscape, organization of living environment, and architectural heritage. The exhibition of 14 Estonian architects served as a catalyst that enhanced, inspired, and strengthened these critical discourses. Also, the critique of Soviet functionalism, uniform building solutions, limitations of means of construction, and therefore planning were not uncommon in publications on architecture in the 1970s. The exhibitions helped to substantiate this critique and to put forward visions for overcoming the crisis. Thank you.